Whipple Rd covered in ice. And my kids right now are roasting hot dogs over the fire, and they're going through withdrawals on electronics. And for those of you that have kids, wait till you get the electricity out a little bit, because literally it's like a drug addict might be. They really need the electricity. So I'm actually, in some cases, my son and I got out there with an axe and, taking away all the trees that fell down from the ice, which is why I've got a little bit, dressed down, because obviously lack of hot water and everything else. But it's fun, it really is. My wife and kids are at home right now. I'll be getting back to them. And, I'll just break it to you. I take my wife on a Valentine's Day weekend away, so I'm trying to get back by tomorrow morning and take her out. So, getting away from campaigning for 2 days. I do like campaigning, and as you know, I do come from the Republican background of Orangeburg. So we see a group like this. This is the convention times 10, and I really appreciate that bit. But I'm at home here because my Aunt Cassie and Uncle John are right here. I really appreciate them showing up. And I have Charleston roots, believe it or not. As Cassie will say, her father, my grandfather, and her grandfather, my great-great-grandfather, were career military officers from South Carolina. And so we've lived everywhere, and I've talked to a lot of folks in different places. I've probably been there. And I jokingly talk about being a knob at the Citadel, where they'd ask where you're from. And I'd hesitate for a moment because I graduated high school in Europe when my dad was stationed in Shape, Belgium. I was born in Hawaii. I've got my birth certificate, by the way. And because my dad's going back and forth to Vietnam and all that stuff. But they'd ask those questions, and but it was an incredible life. It really is. But isn't it interesting how many of us come to South Carolina? And there's a reason. I talk about it, see it all the time. Is there's something about this place. It really is. And quite frankly, I think a lot of it comes into the conservative ideology that we all appreciate. The fiscal, social, national defense, all these ideas that we have, that we believe in. And I've lived in various parts of the country, and I proudly, after my own military career, came back here. But I think I should tell you why I'm running, what got me into politics at such a late stage in life. Because Cass will tell you, in the military, everyone's conservative. I mean, they're your token Democrat, but for the most part, they're all conservative. And we get to combat arms, we're even more conservative. That's just the way it is. At the same time, though, they are apolitical. And in fact, from my grandfather's generation, they didn't even vote for the president because they felt like they really needed to honor whichever president was elected. Eisenhower didn't vote for president until he voted for himself. I think my grandfather was in the same boat. But growing up that way, I was conservative, but stayed away from active politics because, frankly, we were kept from doing that. And what got me in, though, was in 2007, I volunteered to go with the South Carolina's 218th Infantry Brigade over to Afghanistan. And it was for the mission of advising the Afghans to fight the Taliban. And tough time frame because it was during the resurgence of the Taliban movement, particularly in the southern region. And we got there. In fact, I was there with Lieutenant Colonel Alan West, who had just retired but was working as a contractor at that time. It was a tough time. It was during the surge in Iraq, and so we had no extra troops and equipment, and they doubled our mission, so we were kind of 50% strength. We got in and put people out. And our mission was to go in and my mission was, as the Joint Operations Officer at the regional level, was to put our small teams in throughout the southern region. And later I became the senior U.S. advisor in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, which Helmand, if anybody knows, where we sent the Marines to serve a couple of years back. What I saw was something that was absolutely amazing and will always stick with me. And that was, on the battlefield, unlike in almost every situation where you've got millions of Americans and you're token European out there, in this case, we were the tokens. We had a small number of Americans with a bunch of Europeans. And I lived in Europe, and these were brothers in arms, so I respect what they did with us. But there was a difference. And the difference was not genetics, clearly, basically much the same ancestry. It was, two different peoples. And what I saw with our guys was the young captains, the young lieutenants, the young sergeants, is they would constantly show me their initiative, their ingenuity, their hard work, doing things that should have been done a year before, 2 years before, by the Europeans, who just became so habituated to being told what to do. And I came to realize that difference came down to really the systems of government that we're under. That the system of government we live under changes who we are as a people. And of course in Europe, as many of you know, and I've been back and forth there a number of times, they've gone post-Christian and they've gone pretty much socialist. And we've got a different levels of socialism. but that's what they've been. Of course, it's interesting because, I was there during the Cold War. The whole fight was against the Soviet Union, but the Europeans really did go to big government. We're seeing the issues with Greece and other countries. But in America, we were different. And what made the difference is one thing, and it is the theme of my campaign, the Constitution of the United States. It's interesting, when we swear an oath as young Army officers, I did 24 years ago, our oath is, I do solemnly swear to support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. That's the same oath, by the way, I'll take as a U.S. Senator. Exact same oath, word for word. It's about the Constitution. As Army officers, we don't even take an oath to the President. We take an oath to the Constitution. See, there's lawful orders that come down, but our primary oath is to that Constitution. And to me, I came to realize that Constitution is what made the entire difference between two sets of people with the same basic ancestry. It's about freedom. It's about the fact that the Constitution is based on a biblical worldview, the fact that power must be constrained because we have original sin. But the bottom line is that there are enumerated powers in the Constitution that keep the federal government limited. And it was all about freedom. And freedom worked. It's amazing to look through our history at this nation and what it did with this dual sovereignty. This whole idea that you could have a limited central government and sovereign states. That was a new thing. There was a lot of discussion about it in Federalist Papers, but that was a completely new thing, was how was it going to work? Well, it worked. It's called decentralization. One thing I found as a military leader, for example, is that when you decentralize, when you give initiative, you give task and purpose to guys and let them do their job, it's amazing what gets done. And that's what our founders understood. But I came back from Afghanistan in summer 2008. And when I got back, it was the time of the TAR bailouts. It was the time of Barack Obama. And by the way, TAR bailouts, that's where Lindsey comes in. Because Lindsey was part of this issue of not just the Democrats, but the Republicans giving in on our Constitution. There's no mandate whatsoever to allow our government to get involved with the private sector in the way they did with the TAR bailouts. It was absolutely unconstitutional. And I don't care how much they were scared by the economists up there in D.C. about the sky falling down and people's credit cards getting shoved out and everything else. They should not have given in because their oath is the Constitution. So I watched that, and then I watched the Barack Obama get elected. I watched the stimulus package, and then the terrible thing was, when he started the stimulus package, he had kind of a point. He's like, who are you hypocrite Republicans to tell me what not to do? You guys did the TAR bailout, which, by the way, was a failure. So he came in, and I looked at it, and what I realized is I'd see people fight and die for that Constitution, and we were losing it all back here. And so everything that went on overseas meant almost nothing if we didn't fight back here. So on my end, February 27 of 2009, I'd already made the decision I was going to get involved. I was going to fight back. And first Tea Party history of the state, February 27, it was an interesting time, by the way. Because for me, again, new to politics, I had some state legislators tell me, hey, Bill, be careful about that Tea Party movement. We don't know what's going to happen with it. Might be seen too extreme. Might be considered like a neo-Nazi movement. We don't know where it's going to go. And I'm thinking, this is the problem. I mean, you don't put your finger in the wind if you're a leader. You do what you believe is right. And win or lose, you do what you think is right. So that day, February 27th, I was, I think, the second speaker behind Jim Lee and spoke about the Constitution. Now, the press expected 30 people to be there. This is freezing rain on the Reedy River, all the sort of conditions where you wouldn't expect anything. And 3,000 people showed up. And I think those 3,000 people were primarily like me, folks that had been conservative, but really hadn't been active politically until it came to the point where they couldn't sit back any longer. Their children. I think about my 3 children and the fact that when I grew up, I mean, things weren't perfect, but I mean, for the most part, you watch TV, Little House on the Prairie, Walton's, those kind of things. You look at the government, I mean, you think about it, the National Education Department didn't start until Carter's time. I mean, when you look at the debt, the deficits, everything, and how we grew up into what they are now, there's no time to wait. So in my case, I ran for lieutenant governor. That's part of my story is, again, never having to run and coming from, again, the Republican stronghold. And I say that joking because really I had to really work hard to kind of build a base of support. And I don't know how many candidates we had, 7, 8. I mean, Tim Scott came in the race, left, thank goodness. Good friend. But made it all the way to the runoff, and I lost the runoff. And it was devastating. It's tough when you put your heart and soul into a race, you work your tail off, You do all you possibly can. And then, of course, to find out that there was, shenanigans during the campaign, and obviously we all know about that now. But the point was, though, I learned a lot. I'm the only candidate right now, two things. The only candidate who's a veteran, but also the only candidate who's run statewide. And I learned a lot about the issue of running statewide, how important money is, how important certain things are that I wouldn't have known if I hadn't done it. But as far as getting this race, some of you understand the issue of calling. And I'm very unabashed. Some people say I wear religion on my sleeve, but I'm a born-again Christian. And I came to a saving faith almost 12 years ago. And it has made the difference in my worldview into everything. It's why I'm a conservative. It's why I'm a Republican. That doesn't mean I shove the Bible down people's throats, because frankly, I believe the Christian religion is one that teaches that only God can bring salvation anyway. So we want freedom. I want people to have the freedom to worship however they want to, have the freedom that comes from a Christian worldview. And I believe our founders had that worldview when they set up our government. And you can call it whatever you want to, but they understood that there was a job for the church and there was a job for the government. And the government's job, Romans 13, 1-2, is the sword. In other words, it's primarily about national defense, law enforcement, those things that we can't do for ourselves that need to be the monopoly of the government. Now it comes to charity. Charity is the job of the church. And it's amazing when you read de Tocqueville about early America and our rise to greatness. And he was a Frenchman who had seen the phase of the French Revolution, came here in the 1830s, originally to study prisons, but saw the greatness of America. When it came, why did their revolution succeed and ours fail? I mean, there's so many things working against America. And he talked about how the voluntary organizations, the different denominations, all the things that made America great were that we did it outside the government. It was not about our government. It was our government was constrained, and we as a people had a chance to really work as a people. But I do believe in the sense of calling. I grew up, this term was used, Cassie will tell you, is you don't become an Army officer unless you feel called to it. And it doesn't mean God's audibly talking to you as the president, but it just means you feel a calling. It's a tug in your heart to do something. And I was called to go to Afghanistan. I wasn't in that unit, but I volunteered because of what I felt. Last year, I felt the calling to get back in the fight. And initially, everyone around me was saying, if you're going to run again, run for lieutenant governor. I mean, everyone knows you for that. You made the runoff. I mean, Kennard had to resign because of campaign shenanigans, all that sort of thing. And that's kind of where I was headed initially. And that, frankly, would have been a much easier race to run in a bunch of different ways. But I just kept having this nagging feeling that, Bill, if you do it this time for this reason, it's not about the greater good, it's about yourself. And so I kind of let myself be pulled in where I was going. I watched Lindsey Graham for some time. I was never happy with his amnesty programs our ideas back in 2007, 2008. And we can go into the definition of amnesty, because I went through that in a recent GOP meeting, but he did, frankly, develop proposals to allow people to break our laws, come in, and all that sort of thing. Voting for Sotomayor Kagan. I mean, to me, those two votes right there are just non-starters. And there's no excuse for it. This whole idea that elections have consequences, he does not have a obligation to allow any justice to go through, particularly justices that don't understand the Constitution. And that, to me, is a competency issue and not just some other type of ideological issue. And then I'll tell you, going through everything else I saw, the straw that broke the camel's back was, during my military career, I'd served in Egypt, 1996 to 1997, and it was a peacekeeping between Egypt and Israel, as I talked to some of y'all about tonight. And wonderful experience. I mean, learning about Israel. I mean, I love Israel to death, just from being on the ground, seeing people. And until you get a chance to see Israel, you wouldn't understand. Because I came into it skeptical of the Israelis. I kind of bought into some of the things of how tough they may have been on the Palestinians at that time. Once I saw it, I was like, no way. This is absolutely one where this is a friend, this is a country we need to support. They're surrounded by enemies, all that sort of thing. But I also had a chance to see the Egyptian military. And the peace treaty I was on, the mission I was on, by the way, the MFO, was from the Carter-Sadat-Begin peace treaty from back in 1979, 1980. And it's worked. And it's worked primarily because the Egyptian military has kept the Muslim Brotherhood under wraps. The Muslim Brotherhood killed Sadat. The Muslim Brotherhood is our ultimate nemesis. Those that understand it realize that all those groups we see that are enemy, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and even in some ways, either Shia, Hezbollah, they all take their cues from the Muslim Brotherhood. Al-Qaeda, if you look at their ideology, it comes from, there's a man, Pt1, who's jailed, he's a Muslim Brotherhood leader. And his writings were used by the Al-Qaeda to develop their ideology. So the point is, Muslim Brotherhood is bad. It was also, by the way, too, a reaction to Kemal Ataturk when he started secular Turkey and tried to bring Turkey into the 20th century in Europe. He ended the caliphate. Their idea was to bring back the caliphate. Now, that's not a benign thing. You know, the idea of caliphate means women are treated as chattel. Non-Muslims, Jews and Christians, are treated as second-class citizens. Think Jim Crow. And these are things that Muslim Brotherhood wants to bring. Harsh, non-democratic, go against our values and all that. Well, this past summer, I had the chance to watch Lindsey Graham and John McCain do something I just couldn't believe they did. I expected Barack Obama. But after the Egyptian military, on the prompting of the 10 million, or 10%, 9 million Egyptian Christians, who, by the way, my uncle-in-law is a Christian Egyptian, Wahi. And, I mean, I know what's going on there. They pleaded for the military to step in when the Muslim Brotherhood was trying to make a Sharia law, caliphate-like country. The military stepped in, you know, grudgingly, and actually talked about new elections. And John McCain and Lindsey Graham flew out to Egypt and basically told General al-Sisi to bring the Muslim Brotherhood back in the process, that what they did was wrong, that democracy in this case was good, and so on and so forth and all that. And we, frankly, have lost Egypt. You know, the one time Lindsey Graham agrees with Rand Paul was to cut funding for the Egyptian military. Now, they didn't do it for the Muslim Brotherhood, and that's the problem. Because basically we sent a signal that we don't support getting rid of the Muslim Brotherhood. So with that, I mean, it was, and there was some more things I saw before I got in. I mean, we all saw the defunding issues where, you know, on the one hand, Lindsey Graham votes for defunding. On the other hand, he votes for closure. And the closure vote, as we all know, was the vote. Then he runs TV ads throughout the state that he's the ultimate Obamacare fighter. They're just completely disingenuous, completely, you know. So I jumped in. And, you know, since that time, it's been a whirlwind. You know, I've already said this before. I'm not running against any challengers besides Lindsey right now. And there are some differences. I mean, the key thing here is I believe we need conservative leadership. And I've already said for the others in here, I'm going to support whoever we get. It's not about me. It's about bringing conservative leadership. It's about duty on our country, I believe, and bringing our nation back to where we need to be. But Lindsey needs to go. Amen. So in this case, what are some things that I want to see changed? I mean, the first thing is, when it comes to immigration, we do not need to bend our laws, period. We don't. And I've been asked about this. I was down in a GOP that was somewhat supportive of Lindsey Graham, and they didn't like what I had to say. The point was, though, is we've got laws in the books. We've got laws that allow H-1B work visas for 3 years at a time. It can be extended 2 times, 6 years. You only have to go back for a year. You can come back in. There's tourist visas. There's green cards. There's legal systems for what we have. The problem is, though, we've allowed our Lindsey Graham and people like him have allowed our country to get to the point where we have lost control of our nation. We've lost control of our borders. And they keep telling us the numbers are so high, the Republican Party needs to give in, we need to disregard our laws. Hey, look, this is not about racism. In fact, some of the staunchest people you'll find in this state and around the nation, as far as when it comes to legal immigration, are those Hispanics that have done it legally. You know, you can throw tomatoes at me. Later in life, I went to law school. And as part of my general law practice, I do handle immigration cases. And it's amazing to see people like, you know, Klein up head, wonderful Filipino lady, Christian, high degree of academics, perfect type person to be. Was married to a pastor, passed away. Working through the system, trying to do the right H-1B visas, all the things you're supposed to do. But you're coming in saying, why am I doing this? I look around at all the lawbreakers, and now we're talking about granting what amounts to amnesty. That's Lindsey Graham. And, you know, frankly, he's allowed it to get to the point where now he's starting to patronizingly tell us we must give in. And I'm not going to give in. And the problem with him is, right now, you're seeing a conservative Lindsey Graham because he's trying to get elected. Don't be fooled. Because as soon as he's elected, we've watched what happens. He will go as far to the left as he possibly can for his legacy, and we've seen nothing yet. When it comes to the economics, I mean, here's the bottom line. When you look at the Constitution, and you go through Article 1, Section 8, it lays out the duties of Congress. Have any of y'all seen education in those duties? No? I mean, so, you know, one of the things right now is I want to go through and be a constitutionalist and get us back to Article 1, Section 8, the duties of Congress. There are 19 enumerated duties. Most of them primarily deal with national defense, foreign policy. Congress declares war. Congress raises the militaries. Congress supports the militaries. Congress governs the militaries. That's not the president. The president is actually commander-in-chief if called to active service. And one of the things I want to try to do too is make sure Congress is doing its duty when it comes to the military. Many of you that have family members that are in the military now know our military is being decimated from within. It's not just funding issues. I mean, you listen to General Odierno from last summer, and he said there were only 2 combat-trained brigade combat teams. That's about 6,000 people total. Now, that doesn't involve people that are deployed right now. The point is that training right now for war fighting, which is what the military is supposed to be doing, is not the focus. The focus of this president is radicalization within the military, of bringing the radical homosexual movement, of trying to integrate Navy SEALs and talking about gender integration, Navy SEALs, Rangers, things that we need to be talking about, because these are not good ideas from those that are in the military. Those people in submarine service not understand the same thing. Congress has a duty to oversee this. Congress has a duty to have hearings about this sort of thing. And a little interesting statistic is, up to 1980, almost 80% of Congress were veterans. That number is now less than 16%. 16%. We've had 12 years of war. And I'll tell you as a Republican, this is one thing I'm a little disappointed in, is, and I'm going to help fix this win or lose, because Alan West is doing the same thing right now, is we do nothing when it comes to diversity and bringing veterans into the process. We really don't. We don't. Most veterans are not rich people. Most veterans in this case have good leadership skills, have proven themselves on the battlefield, things of that nature, but we don't make the effort to bring them in the system and show them, here's how you run, here's how you do well, here's how you can win. I'd like to see it so we can have more people politically that can stand up and realize, just because someone's a general officer, they're not always the best people. And when you've been in the military, you understand that sometimes they need to be asked, okay, General Dempsey, why didn't you talk back to the president when he decided to do this, that, or the other thing, when it made no sense for the troops on the ground? Those things are supposed to be doing. And then, I think, frankly, the national debt right now is the number one crisis we have. Number one by far. $17 trillion, and it's still growing. Now, perspective, you go back to 13, 14 years ago, we're talking 4 or 5 trillion. It just is absolutely ballooning out of control. We need to get people in that understand that if we stood by what the Constitution says, the 19 enumerated duties, we wouldn't have this problem. We wouldn't be paying for the education department. That would go back. A lot of the stuff right now that the federal government's doing is state-level type issues. Those issues would be pushed back to the states, and we'd be handling primarily national defense and things that the government's supposed to handle. Now, what they are supposed to handle is uniform rules of naturalization. Are they doing a good job with that? No, not at all. And here's the bottom line is, Lindsey Graham has had a chance. He's had 20 years in D.C. 20 years, okay? 2 decades. That's an entire military career, by the way. I mean, you get your retirement at the end of 20 years in the military. John McCain, 3.5 decades in D.C. One of the things I've already said, I'm on record for this, and I'll put it on whatever record we have, 2 terms is it. I've term limited myself. No matter what, it's 2 terms. And I would tell you to ask whatever challengers to Lindsey, because we want to get Lindsey out. But we also need to go to people who do not become professional politicians. I don't want D.C. to become my home and my heart. I want Orangeburg, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina to be where I'm from. I come back to, that I serve for a period of time, and I come back. The other thing I want to do is reform the retirement system for Congress. It's absolutely out of control. You should not be able to run for office and make a financial windfall and go into Congress. It's ridiculous. You have people right now, and our founders talked about this. Benjamin Franklin talked about the fact that if you have somebody that's going there not only for the power, but also for financial gain, you've got serious issues. Because those 2 things should not be together. They should be paid like the private sector. What private sector job do you know where you serve 6 years or so, and then for the rest of your life you get a full pension? Nowhere. In my military career right now, 20 years, I'm 24 now. When I retire, I'm going to wait till age 59 and draw about half my base pay of what rank I held at the end. That's fair. Most civilian jobs have the same thing, 60, 62, 66, where you draw your pay. If we had a system where congressmen are not getting a financial windfall going to Congress and they're term limited to 2 terms, imagine what kind of people we're going to have. I think we'll have true patriots that care more about this nation than themselves. Now, if you look back in the 19th century, by the way, the median time in the House of Representatives, the median time was only 2 years. And what that meant was that generally someone's out there, there's a successful business leader, and his friends come and say, hey, Joe, it's your turn to go up there. Oh, darn, is it really? Okay, well, I'll do it. But the whole point was, it wasn't like now where you have decade after decade of the same people. They won't term limit themselves. They won't change the retirement system. They won't force themselves to be in the same systems we have. That's another thing I'd like to do is, ensure we push to have a constitutional amendment to where Congress must be under the same laws they pass, i.e. health care and everything else. And again, I think if you change that, you're going to change the people in Congress. The problem is partly party. The Democratic Party has gone way off the deep end. But part of the problem is professional politicians and an establishment I've seen, just from my limited time, last 4 or 5 years, around the political system, not in office, but just looking in. We have got to fix that. We need citizen legislators like the founders intended. Now, again, my whole focus is on Lindsey Graham, but you do have to make a choice. I'm going to give time for question and answer, but I would say this. In my case, I have not served in political office. That could be a pro, could be a con. I would tell you to look around, and Rand Paul did not serve in political office. If you look at Ted Cruz, he was not in elected political office. Mike Lee, same thing. Alan West before he came to Congress. But they trusted him. For me, I spent 24 years of faithful service in peacetime and wartime, protecting, defending the Constitution. And I've talked to Alan West about this too, and he had no problem going up there and sticking by his word. If you elect me, people ask, how can we trust? Well, you can trust me because my life story would tell you that you can trust me, that I won't give in when it comes to the Constitution, that I will stand up for the people. And something you've got to consider. If we send someone to a runoff with Lindsey Graham, I think we're all pretty much in line when it comes to most of the issues. Second Amendment, you can't ask a guy to be more Second Amendment who's had to use a weapon to shoot back in the battlefield when someone's trying to kill you. I will never allow your Second Amendment rights to go. You go down the list of all the things, you're going to find a lot of similarities. But here's the difference. I'm the only veteran running. When we send someone against Lindsey, national defense issues, veterans issues, foreign policy issues will come up. I can talk in detail, from having been there on the ground, about Egypt. I can talk about Syria, because I've studied in depth. I can talk about Iraq. I can talk about Afghanistan. And I'm going to tell you, Lindsey has screwed up royally when it comes to a number of foreign policy issues. Right now, Senator John McCain backed the wrong group in Syria as far as the Syrian rebels. And we're not talking about just the idea of going to war there. He picked, and he's aligned himself with, the Syrian Emergency Task Force. Those guys are radicals. They're funded out of Qatar. General Paul Valley, who's endorsed me for Senate, has been over there a number of times. He's spent a lot of time within Syria and just flabbergasted that John McCain, of course, Lindsey Graham is always behind with John McCain. You guys know, John McCain's the one guy with 2 votes. But they picked the wrong side. In this case, not that they're all, Assad's not a Boy Scout, believe me. He's aligned with Iran, he's got a number of issues. But Assad, for the most part, here's one thing you understand is he's Alawite, which means he's not Sunni, and the Sunnis are really the rebels right now, the radicals, all that. And because they're a religious minority, they're an offshoot of Shia Islam, they do protect the Christians for the most part. We need to understand that bit. Not these perfect and all that, but these nuances. If you're going against Lindsey Graham, you better understand those kind of things when you debate. Because you can't just give, sort of platitudes or he'll kill you on stage. I believe if it comes down to debating Lindsey Graham, I can take him on the issues. And the other thing, quite frankly, is I will be very clear that, look, I believe in the Constitution, but I believe in our military. I will support our veterans to the hilt. I believe our Constitution requires Congress to declare war, but we sent Marines to fight Barbary pirates within 10 years of signing the Constitution. What I mean by that is there are times where we must fight for American interest, and American interest only, overseas rather than here. And I'll make sure, because if you've been to war, you don't want people to go to war. You do not. But there are times where, because of American interest, I volunteered for Afghanistan for a reason. If Lindsey tries to play this game of pointing over saying he's an isolationist, he's, hates the military, whatever, he can't do that to me. He just can't. So that's something I think will come to